Good morning or good afternoon. Hey guys, and welcome to the gas exchange portion of topic 6.4. Woo, we're almost done. We are going to be exploring the gas exchange system, which is basically how air goes into your lungs and how you use it. But the thing about this is it also comes with a really fun exercise that I gotta tell you, some of my seniors last year were a little lazy on and made me do. Yeah, we're gonna do an exercise lab. And when we did it last year, a couple of people whose names I won't mention, Josh, um, had me do the exercise, and then they used my daggone breathing rate. Well, haha, can't do that this time because I'm at home and I'm not exercising. I'm being lazy, and I'm not sure I can actually get up out of this chair. But that's fine. Anyway, uh, but that's not over here. Let's talk about the respiratory system and how it supplies all of that gorgeous oxygen to your body. So let's begin. We are going to talk about ventilation, the structure of your lungs, the pneumocytes, which are fun, respiratory muscles, mechanism of breathing, spirometry, which no, that does not mean drawing in spirals, but it should, or creating spiral-shaped buildings, or spiral geometry, and then lung disorders. Yay! We all love, no, we don't love those at all. Okay, so let's start the scientific mumbo jumbo. When we talk about breathing and science and biology, we call it physiological respiration because we like syllables. Basically just means how gas moves through your body. The first stage is called ventilation, which is the exchange of the air between your atmosphere and your lungs. But since you can read, I'm not going to read any more of this to you. I'm just going to kind of talk about it. So basically, this is you how to breathe. All right, and this comes in two stages. Now, interestingly enough, not all organisms will actually do your classic human inhale and exhale. Some organisms actually use a two-part system that's like inhale, exhale, and that's a full round of breathing. So there's all sorts of ways in which this can be achieved, and we're kind of going to dive into that a little bit during our exploration portion, wherein we're going to compare the lungs of birds, which are amazing, to the lungs of people, which are very inefficient, and we're going to talk about that. But anyway, so ventilation, that exchange of gas. And then we have gas exchange. So obviously it's very important that the gas that goes into your lungs doesn't just go into your lungs and go back out, because what the heck is the point? I mean, my God, it just went to a bunch of sacs and then it went back out. I mean, that's not helpful. So it's got to go into your bloodstream, and in order to diffuse into your blood, which is weird to think about, gas going through your lungs into your body. But anyway, it happens. In order to diffuse to your blood, it's very important. You need to have a certain type of tissue in your lungs that allows for that gas exchange, and you also need some sort of compelling reason why the gas should go into your bloodstream, because remember, hey guys, we're working with concentration gradients here. Stuff doesn't just happen. It's got to go there because it's meant to go there, because there's some sort of thing pushing it over there. It's physics. Anyway, we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about cell respiration, which I know you're like, no, not metabolism. Oh my God. Yeah, no, I'm not going to go all the way over topic 8 again, because I know how much we all love learning about photosynthesis and non-cyclic photophosphorylation. Bless me. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on. So gas exchange. All right, so as I said, there has got to be a concentration gradient for this to occur. Now, you will notice that we skipped over ventilation because IB thinks that you should be smart enough to know when you breathe in, you take air in, and when you breathe out, air goes out. If you're still confused about this, breathe a few times and pay attention, or watch a different video. Anyway, we've moved on to the second process, which is gas exchange. No, this does not mean that you and your friends have a contest after you've eaten a Taco Bell. Gas exchange means that air, or rather O2, is going to be exchanged between your bloodstream and your lungs. And that CO2, which your blood does not want in it, one, because CO2 is not useful to your blood, and two, because when mixed with the liquid, CO2 becomes a acid called carbonic acid. When you do not want acid flowing through your bloodstream, man, what's the acid joke? Because LSD. Anyway, okay, so you know what that's, so you want to get rid of the CO2 and let it flow back into your lungs so that you can breathe it out with all your oniony, garlicky breath. I don't, well, maybe I'm just speaking for myself. But anyway, so let's talk about how this happens. Now, the concentration gradient is pretty obvious when you really think about it, right? When your blood goes out into your body, it's going to release and deliver oxygen to all your tissues. Of course, that's going to mean that your blood is going to have a pretty low concentration of oxygen after it's made all of its stops. It's also going to have a high concentration of CO2 because guess what? It's delivering this oxygen to the cells that are giving off CO2 via their mitochondria, which are undergoing that cell respiration we just mentioned earlier. And they're spewing out a bunch of CO2 that's going to leave the cell and enter the bloodstream as it drops off the O2. So it's pretty easy to understand that once your blood has gone through your system, your systemic circulatory system, and it hasn't gone through the pulmonary again yet, it's pretty full of CO2 and doesn't have a lot of oxygen. Well, when you breathe in, your lungs are filled with oxygen. They have very little CO2 inside, and all of that oxygen is going to be at a much higher concentration than the concentration that's going to be in the blood capillaries surrounding your lungs. And because the blood capillaries offer a ton of surface area, you remember back to your digestive lab, all of that beautiful oxygen is going to flow from a high concentration in your lungs passively to a low concentration in your bloodstream, and the CO2 will do the same in the opposite direction. When you breathe out, the concentration of the gas that you're breathing out is far less oxygen and far more CO2 than going in. It's interesting and weird because all these gases are invisible and you don't think, when you breathe in and you breathe out, it's like, wow, there's not much of a difference. I mean, I felt something go in, I felt something go out. I mean, yep, that's just gas exchange for you. But actually, when you breathe in, there was a lot more oxygen. When you breathe out, there's a lot more CO2 dispersing into the air. You're like some sort of, smokestack, just dispersing a bunch of CO2 everywhere and making the atmosphere dirty. What's wrong with you? I'm sorry, just kidding. Anyway, so ventilation is going to constantly cycle that fresh air, and in order for this to occur, again, your capillaries have to have a lot of surface area as well as your lungs. Your lungs also need a ton of surface area in order to obviously promote the most gas exchange. So let's take a look at where all that surface area comes from. When we look at the lungs, we can see that the tubes leading down to your lungs are called the trachea. Then you got these alveolus. Now, the alveolus are these, they're like little sacs filled with air. If you guys have ever watched Rick and Morty, and I'm sorry to bring this up if you haven't, but if you've ever watched Rick and Morty episode, what is it, Organ Town, or what, oh God, I can't think of the name of it now. They make a theme park out of this person's body, and then they travel down into it. And they're in the lungs, and, they're like, Morty's bouncing around and all the giant pink bubbles. Those are the alveolus. Those things they end up shooting and then causing a terrible, obviously they killed this guy, which is like, anyway, moving on. Then we have the bronchus. So when your trachea comes down, it's going to split into two because you have two lungs. I hope you do. And these are going to be called bronchus. And these are basically like, I don't know, the major thoroughfare tunnels where like all the tubes connect. Your bronchioles are going to be the teeny little tubes that lead out to the alveolus. If you want to think of it this way, if you remember back to your bloodstream, the trachea are like your big arteries, and your bronchus are kind of like where they start to branch off. And then I guess you want to think about it, the bronchioles are kind of like your capillaries, if that helps you at all. So you go from big to small. And then your diaphragm is this big muscle that's underneath your lungs, and it pushes up and down on your lungs, thus squeezing your lungs and then allowing them to naturally, relax and get bigger again. And we're going to talk a little bit about the significance of that in your breathing in just a second. Because of course, when you breathe, you also need a concentration gradient because you can't just suck air in with no reason. There's got to be some other function. Anyway, so when air comes in, it's going to enter via your nose or your mouth, hopefully. It's going to travel down your trachea and split into the bronchi, left to right, left to right. These are going to go into your bronchioles, which is in an alveoli, and alveoli are where you're going to exchange gases. So if you're wondering where's all that surface area coming from, it's from all these alveoli. If you just had these big tubes that led directly into your lungs and that was it, and there wasn't any of all this crazy branching stuff, your surface area would be super small and your lungs would operate at like a 2% capacity, and you would not be able to support all the breathing that you do. Which I'm assuming because you breathe a lot, because and I'm not saying that you sit there and you're just like, but it's important. Okay, so let's talk about pneumocytes, because why not? So when we look at the surface of your alveoli, we're going to see a bunch of pneumocytes. So pneumocytes are going to be basically where the gas exchange is going to happen, and so they cover obviously most of your alveoli. We call them squamous. This is really important. Squamous is a terrible name, but it means that they're very thin. And if they weren't very thin, the gas should have a really hard time diffusing, and we really want it to be easy to diffuse. So these are going to be very thin. It's also going to mean that they're very easy to damage and break. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Or as you remember from the episode of Rick and Morty, they get shot, they pop really easily. So pneumocytes. We need to make sure that that gas can go through. Those are type 1 pneumocytes. Type 2 are going to actually secrete a surfactant, which if you remember, surfactants, we're talking about that in relation to lipids. It's basically going to reduce the cohesion of those lipids and reduce the surface tension in your alveoli. And so the reason why you would want this to happen, we'll talk about this in a second, but it's really important for your alveoli to be able to exchange stuff easily. It's also really important for them to be able to be flexible so that they don't break or become too hard. And we're going to talk a little bit about this a little bit when your whole process of your lungs and your breathing is expand, contract, expand, contract. If they can't do that, it's going to be impossible for them to function properly, and actually it can cause severe damage or even destruction, which we'll talk about later when we talk about lung disorders, and that's obviously not something that you want. So you can think of it this way. Type 1 pneumocytes are going to be like the little thin balloon covers, and this is going to be the stuff you spray on it to make sure that it stays intact and doesn't dry out and fall apart. So when we look over here, we can see here the air spaces provided by the alveoli, and here's the type 2 pneumocyte and a type 1 pneumocyte. You can see the type 1 pneumocytes are these very flat, squamous, small cells, and then type 2 pneumocytes are going to be a little bit larger and a little bit more circular. Pulmonary surfactant. So surface tension is the force created by a fluid surface that minimizes surface area. So obviously you guys know what surface tension is because you've seen water and you've seen bugs walk on water. So the surfactant enables these little alveoli to expand. Now, if they weren't able to expand, I want you to notice a couple things here. One, if they weren't able to expand, the alveoli would have a far less volume. And if you look over here, we can see that the surface area to volume ratio here, the surface area to volume ratio is a lot closer than over here where it's a lot smaller. But this is going to affect your pressure as well, right? And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but when there's less tension here, it basically relaxes the outside and allows it to expand. That's going to actually lower the pressure inside of your alveoli. And you might be wondering, well, why the heck do I care? Well, because you're coming in from these small bronchial tubes where the pressure is relatively high. So when you use a surfactant to make these guys relax and they grow bigger, your volume expands and increases, your tension inside, your pressure goes down, and the air is induced to flow into the alveoli and then come to close contact with the capillaries. So essentially, I mean, think about it this way. You guys ever use a chicken baster and you squeeze a chicken baster and then you unsqueeze the chicken, I don't know, you let go of the chicken baster thing and it like refills or something like that, and it fills it up. Or if you guys know the droppers we use in class where you squeeze a little end of the dropper and then you stick into a liquid and you let go, when the dropper is allowed to expand again, it creates a vacuum, an area of lower pressure inside of the top of that that little squeezer. What words suddenly have just completely left me? The dropper. It creates an area of low pressure within the dropper and all the liquid, goes within the dropper. So this is basically allowing you to have less pressure and create a vacuum for gas to be able to flow in. And here we go. It's exactly what I was saying. So here with Boyle's law, when we look at them, you don't need to memorize Boyle's law, but basically when you have a larger volume or space, molecules have more space to move around in. And that means that there's less pressure. When you have a smaller space, there's less space to move around in, and so they're under more pressure. And of course, stuff tends to flow from high pressure to low pressure. And so when you expand your alveoli, that surfactant allows them to relax, all of this stuff can flow into here and thus get that oxygen content very close to those capillaries. Okay, so as you might imagine, this counts not only for the alveoli, but for your lungs themselves. So how do you take in air and how do you release it? Well, it feels very natural to you, right? Because when you take in air, well, it just feels like, I don't know, the air just flows in. But I want you to pay close attention. I want us to do this at the same time. I want you to blow all the air out, okay? I want you to slowly breathe in through your mouth. Okay, I want you to feel, when you can do it again, let the air out. And I want you to feel, put your hand, put your hand right above your stomach, right? So between your stomach and your rib cage, just kind of set it there flat and breathe in. You feel that? That thing that's rising up there? That weird kind of muscle right there? That's your diaphragm. Okay, so when your diaphragm expands, it causes the space inside your, it basically squeezes your lungs. It makes your lungs smaller. Now, what we just heard, that's going to increase the air pressure inside of your lungs. Okay, so, okay, sorry, I was making sure I was explaining this right. So when you breathe out, you're going to feel that diaphragm expand. And that diaphragm, as it expands when it breathes out, is going to squeeze all the air out of your lungs. It's basically going to make it so your lungs have higher pressure than the air around them. And so the oxygen is going to flow from your lungs out through your mouth and into the atmosphere. When you breathe in, your diaphragm contracts, allowing your lungs to grow larger. And when your lungs grow larger, you're going to have lower pressure in your lungs than the outside air. And the air will follow the vacuum or the concentration gradient into your lungs. So your breathing is actually due to the expansion or contraction of this muscle, not really just you breathing in or out like a vacuum. There is this pressure zone that you are creating or dispersing that allows you to take in this gas. So again, when your diaphragm contracts and flattens, you increase your thoracic volume, and the air flows in. Okay, and of course your muscles contract, pulling your ribs outward to allow for those lungs to expand. And then when your diaphragm relaxes, your thoracic volume decreases, right? Because your diaphragm comes up and squeezes your lungs, and then those muscles that hold your lungs, hold your rib cage out, contract, pulling your ribs inwards, and thus giving your lungs less space. So to go ahead and take a look at there's a great animation here we can see. So here the diaphragm goes down, your lungs expand, and your rib cage expand, and the air comes in. When your diaphragm goes up, your muscles relax around your rib cage. They're allowed to relax again, and your lung is reduced in volume, and therefore high pressure, low pressure, the air flows out. Okay, so that's really what breathing is, which is pretty cool to think about. Right, so hopefully that makes sense to you guys. It's literally just a concentration gradient of pressure, much like the many concentration gradients of pressure we talked about before with flow and loading and all sorts of stuff like that. Okay, so ventilation patterns. So obviously, as you move around, your ventilation patterns change. You were obviously giving out carbon dioxide like a smokestack. Again, you're dirtying the air. How dare you? But when you do that, there's these sensors in your walls of your main blood vessels that are going to detect your CO2 levels, and your ventilation patterns will actually change. So this is pretty cool. If your blood, remember when I said your blood really doesn't want CO2 hanging around in there because it's acidic and bad for you. So when your body senses that, it's like, whoop, we got to breathe more, because the more that you breathe, of course, the more CO2 that you're letting out and the more oxygen that you're letting in. So that's why when you exercise, your body's like, oh, we got to increase your ventilation rate, and therefore you're going to start breathing more and more. Now, of course, that's also responding to, that's not only just that, though. It's not just your CO2 doing that. It's also responding to the increased amount of oxygen that your mitochondria are burning through as they're trying to make energy. And so you're basically, there's two things that's making you breathe faster. One is this, where your body's like, there's too much CO2 in here. We got off gas. And then you got the mitochondria, which are like, we need more oxygen in order to fuel this person's crazy running, right? So we got these two things that are working together in order to increase these two things right here. Your ventilation rate, which is the amount that you breathe, and your tidal volume, which is the amount of air per breath. Okay, so spirometers are basically going to measure that amount and speed that your air is exchanged. So if you have a lung condition or anything, if you have asthma, sometimes they'll ask you to use these. They're interesting to use. And so they can be used, of course, to assess lung disorders. So basically, they're trying to see whether or not you are getting enough or at least an average amount of oxygen when you breathe in, and you are able to breathe as fast as you should be able to breathe. There's nothing stopping that from occurring. This is a really cool machine that allows you to be able to look through and identify things like emphysema and asthma and stuff like that. So lung cancer, let's get into disorders a little bit. So obviously, because it's cancer, it's going to be the uncontrolled or unregulated growth of cells. And of course, this is going to be really bad because when that happens, it can damage your lung tissues. So when we get these cellular growths, these tumors, they're going to interrupt your alveoli, they're going to interrupt your bronchi, in your bronchioles. They're going to disrupt those very fragile squamous cells that we talked about. And so all of that stuff is going to be damaged and destroyed by lung cancer. It's the most common cause of cancer-related death, probably because your lungs are just really easy to damage, more so than a lot of things in your body, a lot of tissues. And of course, when they're damaged, it's very, very hard to repair, and you end up obviously screwing up your whole body, because without oxygen, I mean, how are you going to power your mitochondria? How are you going to live? So lung cancer is a huge thing. Now, it can be genetically disposed. You can be genetically predisposed for it. It can be caused by all sorts of environmental things, and also diseases. So there's just a lot of things that can cause lung cancer, and it's a very widespread problem around the world. Emphysema is interesting. So remember that elasticity we talked about that allowed for that pressure differential and exchange of gas? So emphysema actually gets rid of its ability, those alveoli's ability to be able to expand and contract plastically. So basically what happens is it's going to damage those cells along the walls, and that elastin is going to break down, and basically it's going to be unable to expand and contract. The pressure differential isn't going to be there. You're going to lose a lot of that directional flow of oxygen towards your blood system, and basically it's just going to make it very, very difficult for you to get any sort of good yield of oxygen out of your lungs. So your lungs become more and more inefficient over time, and then eventually it can cause death or just severe problems getting enough oxygen. So that's all we have to talk about. I know it's short. I know it's sweet and to the point. Well, hopefully it was short, sweet, and to the point. But that's really all that we have to say about that, in the words of Forrest Gump. So we're going to go ahead and explore birds and human lungs and do a little bit of comparison between their breathing systems, because it's pretty freaking cool how different they are. And it can really allow you to appreciate how diverse breathing is just in the natural world. It's really neat. Okay, but then after this, in our next class, we're going to go ahead and do a fun experiment, that one that I mentioned before with the exercise and the breathing. You guys are going to take data at home. You should be able to do this no matter where you are, unless you are, like, in a full body cast. And if you are, please let me know, and I'm so sorry. I'll definitely excuse you from the assignment. But we're going to do that fun lab. We're going to finish up gas exchange this week. And guys, it's going to be awesome because we have very little left to talk about in topic 6. And then we can go ahead and start our final projects of the year. So cool. Welcome to May, guys. It's going to be awesome. All right. Take care, stay safe, and stay well. I miss you guys.